Thank you, Jamie. Hi, everybody. My name is Ramiro Calderon. I'm a principal PM here in the Entra team. And today we are going to cover what is our Microsoft guidance when it comes to migrating from on-premises focused environment and transform gradually to the cloud. So this process is going to be a journey that's going to take several steps. So what we're going to share with you is um, a journey on like 5 discrete steps, and we want to also share with you how we break this down in functional areas. So we call it pillars. So we're going to unpack that a little bit. So that's kind of maybe the agenda for today. And let's get going here. So the idea here, as I said, is what is our position as Microsoft to help customers to transform the environment? We get a lot of questions for customers over the years, and which is the reason why we decided to put this session together. Is a lot of customers are seeing now that Entra and the underlying capabilities in the cloud are getting more and more robust, and even like more sophisticated than those on premises. So we get questions from customers: how do I go about transforming my environment? I want to eventually get out of AD. So how do I get that? Like, that's a massive surface area. So what we basically want to share with you today is how you can take practical steps to start a journey or see where you are, and then derive next steps that are concrete and applicable to you. Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit. So the first question that we get typically is, why migration in the first place, right? So there's typically people inside organizations that are on board with that, but then sometimes they need to make the case to their leadership, their colleagues, and other teams in the organization. So we have this set of points for you to understand and communicate if needed. So the first thing that we want to kind of emphasize when it comes to transformation in the cloud is that it's better security. And the reason for that is because we have the benefit of the massive amount of signal that we can use to create those intelligent policies based on machine learning, AI, and others, where you basically have dynamic control. So on premises, you have a static set of controls like ACLs and things like that, but when you put it in the cloud, then you have way more capability. So it's better security. One example, very concrete, is modern credentials, right? So we have multi-factor authentication that you can put policies to challenge the customer for a stronger credential as needed, even passwordless credentials. And then, as I said, the massive amount of signal coming from identity protection and conditional access. In the other side, we have productivity. So we have the cloud there's no constraints about having to be in a corporate network, right? So it's optimized, and it's actually kind of internet first kind of mentality. So it's optimized for that kind of scenario. We saw that in COVID, where massive demand of remote work. So how do you react to that? Another thing is single sign-on, which is not only for productivity. Obviously, it's great to not have to get prompts every time, but also for security, right? Because single sign-on also gives us an opportunity to centralize that sign-on ceremony, if you will, terminate sessions based on risk, or take additional steps, and more prompts is not necessarily more security. It's actually the opposite. So single sign-on is actually conducive to teach the customers to be more suspicious about unexpected prompts and things like that. And then importantly is a self-service and automation-driven life cycle. So that is on that productivity side, and then return of investment, right? So we have been, Yusuke, myself, and others in the team have done this for a while with actual customers for almost 10 years. And then what we have seen in the time is that getting results on getting that outcomes is way quicker from the return of investment in terms of how quickly can we spin things up. So that is kind of why we pitch this. It's just not it's cool to have less servers on premise, because we have these other benefits as well. So now One question that we have is, and this is where we spend the rest of the session, is how do we break this big problem into smaller problems? So we have kind of two dimensions to the problem in the first place. So here is a typical on-premises environment. I don't know if you see my arrow here, but we have Windows Server and the corporate devices and the employees, so that is pretty straightforward. But then you start having more and more infrastructure over time with the VPNs and the DMZ and all that. So to break this problem into smaller problems, we have divided into three what we call pillars. So let's talk about that. So we have, at the end of the day, we have a user trying to get something done, right? So a user access a resource to achieve something. So at the end of the day, they have to do it, and then they have to do it from some device, from some endpoint, right? So we to have this conversation in a more like discrete distribution of areas, we came up with three what we call pillars. So one is applications and resources, which is this blue at the top, which is essentially the applications or what you need to access, right? So we have applications, various technologies, and then applications can be on premises or in the cloud. We also have the pillar of devices, which is the servers and the endpoints, the laptops, people's devices, etc., and the infrastructure around it, and then the users and groups. So we have those three pillars, and this is what we use to literally the agenda of the meeting. So we're going to have my colleagues talk about each of these separately, but essentially this is just one. There's no perfect way to slice and dice the problem, so this is just one area we chose to do. One thing that I'm going to call out is that in the middle we have plumbing, right? So in the middle we have plumbing to do some sort of orchestration of identities, provisioning, that's IDM services. We have the actual domain controllers and so on. So this plumbing is just to facilitate the interaction between users and applications from a device. So that is how we want to break down. So this is why you see the kind of why we broke down the session in these three pillars. And then now let's talk about how we do it over time. So this is functional areas. Now how we do that over time. So as we said, we have three pillars, and the idea is that each of these pillars is going to be decomposed or broken down into different streams of activity. So projects that you can fund, you can drive in each of these areas to gradually transform the environment. So how do we go about that? One important thing is that these streams can progress independently. It will be all depending on your appetite for change and the velocity of change, the appetite to disrupt, do things differently and things like that. But it can be progressing as fast as you want, as independently as you want. So with that, let's talk about the states of transformation. So as I mentioned before, this is a journey, and this is kind of the view of transforming the environment over time. So we got from the first step, which is cloud attached, which is basically you have the environment as you had it on premises, and then you just enable the first cloud workload that requires basically to figure out authentication and synchronization, right? So this is just the bare minimum. So this is where we all started back in, I don't know, 2014 or so, even earlier than that, when you get Office 365. And then the states start to go more into having more stuff in the cloud. So hybrid means you have your on-premises environment, and then for you to protect your cloud applications, you start kind of informing the cloud that there are things on premises that are special. For example, I have devices that have this thing called domain join. So if the device is domain joined, then allow access to Office 365. So in that case, you still keep doing what you're doing on premises, and then on premises is kind of the center of control of your policies and your environment. But then you are basically starting to light up some capabilities around that inform the posture on cloud. Now, stage 3 is when you start taking like steps to do things differently and then start thinking about doing the quote unquote cloud way first. So that's why we say cloud first. A great example is, hey, for new devices, let's not have uh, the traditional domain join. Let's natively use the cloud capabilities called Entra join and use MDM with Intune and modern capabilities so we don't have to kind of keep augmenting the footprint on premises. Similarly, hey, for new applications that are in the cloud, then let's use the cloud for identity management and single sign-on, as opposed to, let's say, if you have a federation service like ADFS, just keep adding apps in ADFS and so on. So in that case, you start doing things differently. In some cases, you start like, hey, for new applications in the cloud, let's provision them in the cloud. So you see that IDM, for example, start to be a little bit of IDM in the cloud, but then some. So but then fundamentally, in the cloud first environment, you are starting to do things differently, but not massively disrupting. Now, stage 4 is when you basically start doing the vast majority of management in the cloud, and then you treat AD as a quote unquote legacy locus of control, or you just basically keep it only for a subset of legacy applications and legacy scenarios. In that case, for example, maybe users are created directly in the cloud and not from AD, right? So in a customer actually wanted to tell me, hey, I aspire to see Active Directory just as another app that I happen to provision, but everything else happens from the cloud. And then lastly, a transition to be 100% cloud. So as you can see, these are just states over time. A couple of things here is that each of these, as I mentioned before, can advance independently. So in devices, for example, you can be all the way to 100% cloud for, let's say, people's information workers' devices. So a lot of customers are already there where all the devices are Entra joined. You don't have domain joined devices, but at the same time, you still may be doing some progress on the applications and user side. So this is another view that I also love using, which is of each of these states, you have different goals. And as you can see here, the different pillars, you will have some rate of progress that is slightly different. So this is a typical example of a devices side. It's pretty linear, right? So it's typically, I have a footprint of devices that are domain join, and then over time, due to like hardware life cycle, and then you get a new device, then the new device is cloud first, then you start burning this down linearly. Whereas applications, you can start with the easy ones, but then you will take some time to the harder ones that are on-prem and things like that that you need to spend more time research on the legacy protocols and all that you have to rationalize, and that they typically you start easy and then you have a long tail. And similarly with users and groups where you have probably a lot of processes and legacy reasons why users need to be provisioned on-prem, and then at some point in time there's an inflection point where you can do cloud only. So each of these pillars is going to advance over time at a different pace in parallel. So that's the important part. And then here's some benefits. Again, we get this question a lot from our customers. So in each of these states, what are the benefits? So we have these three angles of security, productivity, and return of investment. So here you can see the outcomes of productivity early on, but mainly because we are just adopting more cloud applications. But then over time, we have additional benefits and security because we're now taking applications that are already there and so on. So this is just different ways to talk about the same angle, which is it's going to be a journey over time. We're going to have progress in parallel across different things. But at the end of the day, it's just going to take time. So with that, I'm going to share a little bit of an example of how this journey took shape in real life of a customer. So this is a customer in the retail sector that has 90,000 Active Directory accounts. They had 30,000 employees in the workforce, and then 60,000 externals, which is kind of interesting. So they have, for the external users, they had Active Directory accounts, and then they just had very basic usage of Office and Azure. So this is kind of what we call stage one. The pain points that they had that were motivating them to start this journey in the first place is that they had just kind of house of cards kind of situation where all these point solutions on-prem on top of each other were causing a lot of like outages and delays in the machines, taking forever with so many agents on top of each other. So they wanted to take a step back and just say, let's simplify the environment and let's reduce some costs. I think they had up to, I would say, 100 plus security products. So they wanted to take a step back and kind of streamline all of that and go to an integrated solution with Microsoft security. So it's not just Entra, but the entire stack with Intune, Sentinel, and so on. So that was the main pain point for them. And then they had these goals. So in the short term, they wanted to decommission the most painful piece of infrastructure, which were around the single sign-on or federation, the point solution for multi-factor auth. In medium term, they wanted to get out of the data center, so the CISO literally told them, "I'm not paying I'm not renewing the lease for the data center space in a year and a half. So you guys have 18 months to figure out how we're going to get out of the data center altogether, and then long term, which is we're still through that, and it's been more than 8 years, is basically keep shaving off Active Directory and eventually treat it as another app, which is kind of targeting state 4, which is another important point. Not everybody is going to, for logistic practical reasons, or in some cases legacy constraints, that is not realistic to get to turn off AD. But if you get closer to state 4, for example, that's probably an acceptable outcome. So that's another thing, is that we are not saying everybody should go out of AD or turn off AD as the target state. In some customers, it's just kind of the reality that the applications mainly are going dictating if what is ultimately practical and feasible, possible, etc. Okay, so that was how they started. How do we got on the first set of projects? So the first one is we had to discover what applications were there and did a proof of concept. So we onboarded a couple of applications first, but then to even get that basics right, we had to modernize the SecOps. So we have to teach people how to use the logs from the cloud, how to use cloud security policies for authentication, how do we consume the logs from Sentinel and so on. So we had to modernize the SecOps and then get out of that SSO product. So we enable password hash sync, and then we enable Entra ID join. So these are a lot of things like a stage 2, right? So hybrid state. So basically turn on the hybrid state, but then we started to move a little bit to native, cloud native, for example, credentials. So we switched from that point solution for MFA on premises to authenticator app, but we roll it out with a subset of users. And then this is an important thing, is the way we got the most of the plumbing correct that set us up for the rest of the applications was to take the first hero workload. So they were not only transforming the infrastructure side of authentication and so on, which is what we're doing today, but they were also modernizing the HR. So they just took, hey, let's just launch this whole thing as a package. So cloud HR alongside this new cloud identity management system, all in that kind of vein. Cool. So moving on. Now, the next step after we got the foundation right was start to aggressively fund projects to decommission and modernize existing applications. So we deployed application proxy for remote access. So there were a number of applications that were on premises with Apache servers using Kerberos or NTLM, things like that. So we modernized all of that to use application proxy, roll out MFA for everybody, which was a way to get everything in conditional access, as a new modern way to say, and then moving all these apps that they had from this on-premises product to Entra. So SAML applications, Lotus Federation, all that stuff we moved to the cloud. So that allows us to decommission those products alongside the MFA. And then we went after the 60,000 users. So you will see that these are like different pillars kind of working on each other or through each other. So if you see this based on our original model, this is kind of aligned to stage 2 and 3, for example, first and foremost. So, and then on the devices side, then deploy Microsoft Managed Desktop and Intune to basically revamp how they manage the devices. So this was not just use Entra join, it required them to take all the GPOs, mapping to Intune policies, and so on. So it was a little bit of revamping of not only the authentication part, but also the device management part, which is kind of a little bit of what Justin is going to share. All right. So with that, the customer is still going on, and this we're now in the long tail of moving the on-premises IAM product that they have to take the provisioning from HR all the way to the applications and to AD and all that, just making it modern to the cloud. And now we are just leapfrogging the credentials that were deployed based on Authenticator app to do passkeys based on the new capabilities. And now we are just moving to start doing even from on-premises applications management all the way to the cloud. So that is just an example. But what we're going to do now is going to zoom into the various pillars. And then my colleague Dania is going to talk a little bit about the users and groups pillar. So Dania, you want to take it away?
Thank you, Ramiro. Hello, everybody. My name is Danya Krishnamurthy. I'm a product manager in the Identity and Access Management team within Microsoft. Thank you so much for being here. Today, I'm going to actually going to cover the users and pillars group and how you should think about it from a AD minimization strategy perspective. I'm going to focus mostly on how you can reduce your Active Directory dependency, which is the stage 4 that Ramiro was talking about before we actually go cloud only in the future. So let's talk about, can we move to the next slide, Ramiro?
Sure.
So let's talk about the current state. Today, we have customers that bring identity from their on-premises HR system into Active Directory using an IDM system of their choice. Then they use Entra Connect Sync or Cloud Sync to provision these identities into the cloud and then leverage all the capabilities and the advantage that you have with Microsoft Entra features. Now, AD is the central system for managing all these identities and access management. Next slide, please. What we want to do is shift that thinking. Our thinking is to make our customers be Entra ID centric, with all the identities flowing to and from Entra as your management plane. In this world, like Ramiro said, Active Directory just becomes another target, even if the customer requires it to be. So eventually, we don't want you to leverage Active Directory, but to begin with, we understand there are complications around it. And with all the users and groups managed from the cloud and being editable and all the connectivity required to all applications, you can use a rich set of the Entra capabilities to manage, govern, secure, and protect your business. So like Ramiro mentioned, the reality today here is that it's a multi-year process. And we do have to have capabilities that we have to build in order to let you get to that state. So for the next few minutes, I'm going to actually walk you through the current capabilities that we have today in the users and groups pillar and talk about how you could leverage to actually enable certain scenarios that will get you to that cloud first as well as to that AD minimized state. Next slide. So now let's take a holistic look at where we are. So for customers who are in the hybrid state, today you can actually sync all your identities using either Cloud Sync or Connect Sync and have users, groups, devices move to the cloud or sync to the cloud, not move. You can have you can actually manage guest access using external identities capabilities. Then you have basically all your cloud user management from one place as well. And for non-AD based applications, you could actually deploy what we call as on-premises app provisioning from Entra ID and then provision those provision users to those applications. If you're in state 3, which is you have actually migrated most of your devices to the cloud, you're using intra-joined devices, and you have certain legacy systems in on premises that you still have dependency on. You have an on-premises HR system. Now, today, you can think about how you could deploy Entra ID governance for app governance. You can start thinking about leveraging a list of features I'm going to be talking around HR provisioning, where you can actually shift that thinking about onboarding employees into Entra ID directly instead of going through Active Directory. You could use the Entra ID governance capabilities like joiner mover, like LCW, to enable what we call as a joiner mover leaver scenario, thereby automating your entire employee onboarding process. And if you're in state 4 and you have a ton of LDAP applications that you cannot modernize and you have issues around it, you could think about leveraging Microsoft Entra domain services to shift those LDAP applications and then trying to get away from those LDAP applications in on premises. So these are like how we think about it, like using the current set of capabilities we have. Next slide, please. So let's start with a few recommended patterns here. So for the first scenario where I talked about modernizing user account management, in order for you to get there, in order to make sure that you have cloud user management account in the in Entra, here are some of the patterns that we recommend for you. And I'll be actually walking you through each one of these today. You can also have another scenario which will allow you to enable on-premises governance, application governance with cloud native accounts. And these are the way you can do that. So I'm going to be walking again through some of these features in order to walk you through how you can enable these two scenarios. So even today, after the session, if you go back and try one of these, you'll be able to achieve these scenarios with these capabilities that are currently present for everybody to leverage. Next slide. So let's start with the top 3 go-to things that you can do for this particular pillar. The first thing we are suggesting to do is to modernize your user management, like I spoke about in the previous slide. For that, you're going to use HR-driven provisioning for both. Like if you have the ability to do it directly, like provision directly into Entra, you can do that, or you can go through Active Directory until you're ready to actually ship that to the cloud. You can use cross-tenant sync for multi-tenant collaboration, which allows you to collaborate across multiple tenants and access M365 collaboration tools. You can use external identities for business collaboration. This way, you're getting all your cloud user management happening in Entra ID. The second thing you can do is you can start governing on-premises based applications using Microsoft Entra ID governance. There are 2 capabilities here that I'll be walking you through. And this is, and I'll also walk you through the problem statement of what you will achieve by doing this. And finally, you can manage your employee access lifecycle with Entra ID governance. Like I said, automating your entire employee onboarding using Microsoft Entra governance is a huge win in terms of ROI and time saving. You can quickly enable JML scenarios and have access to the right set of resources for the right people in Entra uh, in a short period of time. And you can also use certain capabilities within governance to manage identity and access lifecycle at scale. Now let's go through each one of these capabilities in sequence. Can we go to slide 26? Okay, let's start with HR-driven provisioning here. So today we know that HR systems are key sources of records. They are what we call as the source of truth. So we have direct integration via direct connectors, which are available in our gallery today. So we have 2 connectors. One is Workday SuccessFactors, and then we have a third one called the generic API. We will dig a little bit into that generic API in the next slide. If your user data is required in any on-prem setup, we can use Cloud Sync to provision these users to AD or any other on-premises application. Users can also be synced to any of our 300 connected SaaS applications that are integrated with Entra ID. So with direct integration of HR systems, you're enabling automatic employee onboarding, like basically the lifecycle management of it, of user creation, update, and deletion. And today you're doing it through Active Directory, and in the future you should be able to do it through Entra ID directly. So now let's talk about the API-driven provisioning. Next slide. So there are 3 scenarios that we will be able to address with API inbound provisioning. What is this? So today we have an ability to create, we have direct connectors like I explained. But tomorrow, if you want to add more HR systems to integrate with Microsoft Entra, there are three scenarios that you could apply here. The first one is flat file CSV or SQL. A lot of customers have employee information or contractor and vendor information exported into one of these formats using an automation tool, and then they are used to sync that into enterprise identity directories, Entra ID being one of them, or AD being one of them. With API inbound driven provisioning, you can use any two automation tool of your choice. It can be either an Azure Logic Apps or it can be PowerShell, and you can actually modernize this integration. The next scenario is using direct integrations like we just spoke about. So today we have SuccessFactors and Workday, but you can have some HR system that requires integration with Entra ID, and you need to push identities into Entra. And with API inbound provisioning, we support HR ISVs to ship native synchronization experience. So the changes in the HR system are automatically flown into Entra ID and then connected to on-premises Active Directory domains. For example, if you have an HR application or student information systems that can send data into Entra ID as soon as the transaction is complete, it's a trigger based, and or you can do it as end of the day bulk update. It's your choice in doing that. The final scenario is having system integrators build the integrations for you. So in this way, you can have partners who are very proficient in building these HR connector systems, build it using the inbound provisioning API that then can be leveraged for your organization. In all of these above scenarios, the integration is greatly simplified because the Microsoft Entra provisioning service takes all the responsibility of performing identity profile comparison, restricting the data to scoping logic configured by the IT admin, and also execute like sync rules or attribute flows and transformations using all the inbuilt capabilities in the system. Next up is, I think that's it for this slide. Can we move to the next one? Okay. So the next one is around, I think it's one slide previous, like I think we have to go to the external identities. Thank you, Ramiro. The next one is external identity. So we talked about how you can centralize your user cloud, like cloud management, like user management in the cloud. And using external identities is one of the key capabilities that can allow you to do this. Using this, you can actually set up external identities in the cloud, and then you don't even have to use a sync system to in order to sync it from Active Directory to Entra ID. You can do that if you want to, but you can also directly create them in the cloud, and you can manage that using external identities. The other one the next one is, let's go to the next slide. So, okay, the next one is about governance. So let's go to the focusing of governance and how we can use that. So let's talk about the governance of AD applications. Let's start with that. So next slide. So we talked about how you could start creating groups in the state 3 that Ramiro touched upon, which is you now creating groups in the cloud, and you're now wanting to govern certain applications in Active Directory using Entra ID governance from the cloud. So the reason for having this particular capability is one of the scenarios that we keep hearing from customers is there is a lot of groups in Active Directory, either created through their IDM system or IAM tools, which has self-service group creation. So there's tons of groups created with access to applications, and admins have a hard time figuring out which groups are used for which application access. So in order to move away from that model, and in order to have a very clean slate, we actually uh, we actually are going to ask customers to start creating any new groups from scratch in the cloud, and then add synced users to those groups, and then provision that group into Active Directory, so that you could actually use Entra ID governance and leverage what we call as ELM to govern those groups from the cloud. So this way, let's say that this group has access to a certain application in Active Directory. you would be able to go and add and remove, like do access reviews, add and remove users from this particular group using our Entra ID governance capabilities, thereby controlling who's accessing that particular application. So this is one way of figuring out, okay, I have too many groups in AD. I don't know which one is what. Let me start from scratch. Let me leverage the capabilities that we have today within Entra ID governance and use what we call as group provisioning to AD, which is available in Cloud Sync today, in order to govern these applications. So that's one of the features we recommend. Next slide, please. The next set of features is also to govern on-premises application, but non-AD based application. So today, in order for you to govern non-AD based application, you can use what we call as on-premises provisioning tool known as, for ECMA. So we basically are creating, allowing customers to use their existing MIM ECMA connector configuration, and you can actually provision users to SQL, SOAP, REST, and LDAP based application. And then you can include them in what is known as access package, which will I come to, and then leverage that in order to govern those applications. So our recommendation is, if you're having applications in AD or applications elsewhere in on-premises, and you want to govern access to these applications, we have all the availability, like we have all the capabilities available today for you to start doing it. And by doing this, what you're doing is you're slowly shaving off some of those dependencies that you have with Active Directory. And then you can go back into your Active Directory and look at to see what groups are really needed versus what users are, like what applications are really needed, and then clean them up as you're doing this particular exercise. Next slide. Finally, I'm going to quickly touch upon the Entra ID governance landscape. Next slide. Okay, so what is Microsoft Entra ID governance? Our customers need to effectively do identity governance to address compliance requirements, regulatory requirements, minimize any risk, both malicious or unintentional, and basically prevent lateral movement by attackers. So in order to do that, we would need to have a governance capability that allows you to make sure that the right people have access to the right resources at the right time. And the way that we do that with Entra ID governance is it is set up in such a way that you can actually have connectivity to HR sources, automatically do user onboarding from authoritative HR sources. You can automate and perform self-service access management across all organization apps, which I just touched upon. You could also leverage the capabilities to understand whether there are systems that have excessive permission. You can also like govern workload identities as well as external identities. So just to make sure, this is a suite of capabilities that we have today that will allow you to achieve these scenarios. Next slide. Let's start with entitlement management. I mentioned what this was at a very high level in the previous slides. This is a key capability in Entra ID governance that manages access requests to resources and also allows recertification of those access. So what does that mean? So for example, I can basically take, let's say that I have a new employee joining a specific department. I can identify all the resources that are tied to the department that this particular employee needs access to. Then I can create what is known as an access package, put all those resources into that access package. And then as part of the employee onboarding process, when this person is on the first day that person comes into work, now they have access to this access package, which is a concept we use within ELM. And at that point, you now have access to all those resources. So that's how you do it. Not just that, you can also use integrated with logic apps, so you can actually have custom workflows. So if you have already an existing logic or you have an existing component that you're using to do this, you can actually integrate it with Microsoft Entra Governance and leverage that in order to monitor access requests. And it also has an approval process, and then you can leverage the recertification process in order to make sure that the access that that particular employee has continues to be there. So a good example is when they are moving to different department. Obviously, you're going to remove all the access to the existing department, and then give them access to the ones that they are moving towards the further job position. That's access requests, workflows, and approvals, all under entitlement management. Now, let's go to the next slide. Lifecycle workflows. So we talked about joiner, mover, and leaver scenarios. And lifecycle workflows is exactly for that purpose. It allows your organization to schedule workflows when for example, when a new employee joins your company, or they move from one organization to another within the company, or when they are terminated. So with all of these scenarios, IT admins can build a very cloud powered workflow, and there are built-in templates that are available today. And then you can basically trigger a workflow to generate any one of these scenarios. Let's take an example, right? So, for example, you're going to have a new hire, and the new hire is going to join in another week. You can actually set up a workflow where you can generate a temporary access pass for this particular new hire, send that access pass to the manager of the new hire, and then on the date of the hire, send a reminder email to the manager to make sure to give that a new hire that access so they can come in, get access into these systems to the new employee. And like I also mentioned, they also will get immediate access to all the resources they need using entitlement management, which is integrated with this. So that is how we are managing that end-to-end scenario. For example, in this case, a new hire. So lifecycle workflows is a capability that's already available today, and you can leverage that in order to automate your entire employee onboarding workflow. Last slide. Before I hand off to my colleague, this is what we are thinking in terms of how you can move your users and groups from hybrid to cloud first to AD minimized. This is kind of the scenario capability mapping. So I'm just going to leave it here for you to look at it to see how you can think about these. And this is not just users and groups, right? We're talking about how you're thinking about your devices, how you're thinking about provisioning, how you're thinking about authenticating into applications, and how you can use Entra ID governance for managing and users and groups lifecycle. So with that, I'm going to hand off over to Mihai, who will take over
That's
now.
correct. Thank you so much, Dania. Thank you. I'll just share my screen in a second, and then I'll start talking to you about apps art. Okay. Great, I think everyone can see my screen now. All right, so I'm going to talk to you about applications today. And as my colleagues mentioned earlier, this is an approach where you don't have to do everything in the same time. So you can do either users, either apps, either devices, and they don't have to be done in the same time. Now, on the app side, when you think about apps, it's of course the apps that think about APIs, think about the applications that you're developing for your customers, and so on. So if you look at the apps pillar, you're going to see something similar with what Daniel was mentioning earlier. So you have, of course, Entra in the middle, and then you have applications that might use protocols like Kerberos, LDAP, and TLM. You can have intranet or cloud apps, which can be accessed via IDFS if they're on premises, or you can have applications which are hosted in the cloud. You can also think about VPNs, printers, DNS file servers, and so on. So I'm going to try to cover most of them in the next 15 to 20 minutes, and I'll try to give you some highlights on how you can modernize your app environment and how you can actually move closer to the cloud. So moving a little bit forward, similar to what Dania said, we want to provide you a path for hybrid customers, for customers to move as close as possible to the cloud, and also to provide you an integrated solutions to manage and govern your secure access for your identities using, of course, Microsoft Entra. That's our high-level goal. However, as Ramiro said, we understand that there are 5 steps in this process, and we understand that you might not have started the process yet, or you might be in different stages of it. But the end one is to move to the cloud or to be as closer as possible to the cloud. Here on the slide, you are going to see a couple of patterns depending on the scenarios that I wanted to recommend you to use So if it's you're just starting this journey and you wanna start with something and you're like, hey, I have no idea about how I can start this journey on the app side. Here are a couple of ideas. So for example, if you have federated scenarios, you can use a simple tool which we've built called the IDFS Migration Wizard, which helps you to identify which are the applications that can be moved immediately. So with just a few clicks, so you use the app, and with just a few clicks, you'll be able to see which apps can be moved now and which apps need more attention from your side. And that attention could mean either they need certain configurations, either they need some small developments in order to be moved. Of course, this is apart from the Entra SSO feature. The new applications that you develop, you can use our identity platform already. So in general, I think I want to split the modernization or the movement of the apps to the cloud in a couple of clusters. The cluster one, let's say, is that if you want to build a new app, directly use newer technology and use directly the Microsoft Identity platform. If you have, on the contrary, if you have applications which have to be moved to the cloud, I would separate them in two bays. Either one is the ones that might never be able to be moved because of compliance or security reasons, and the ones that can be moved, but for which you might need maybe to write a new app or use one of the patterns that I'm sharing with you here on the slide. So talking about those ones are typically the application with legacy authentication. So that's why I was saying you can modernize. So for example, if it's Windows integrated and it's a web app, you can modernize the app using secure hybrid access or app proxy. Or if you want to go even further, you can use Entra private access, which is our new VPN solution. If those are non-web apps, of course you can keep using secure hybrid access and Entra private access, but not really the app proxy side. If you have internet resilient or mission critical apps, wait, because for the moment we are not having we cannot offer you a solution for those. If you're thinking about LDAP applications, because this is one of the questions that I actually get pretty often. So, hey, Mihai, what are we going to do with the LDAP applications? I think you can look at the Microsoft Entra domain services, or for the ones who have been using Microsoft products, you can recall about ADDS, so active domain services. I think this is also another thing that you could consider, is that actually, you should not rely on LDAP that much. So I often get this question about, okay, so why don't you directly end of the and support for certain protocols? And the answer is like, there is no alternative, and we don't want to always force everyone to move into that direction. We understand the challenges, and we're trying to create all the circumstances so that people can migrate, but we also understand that we cannot just cut off the access. So if we're thinking about modernizing the application security posture with Entra, so if you look, I spoke a little bit about the app proxy. I think the app proxy gives you the possibility to do remote access to on-prem applications, and it has native support for legacy authentication protocols. And I think this is important because, as I was saying earlier, we understand that some of the apps use some legacy protocols. And app proxy, if you're thinking about a web application, app proxy can be a service that you could use to come closer to the cloud. So you can move the user closer to the cloud, and then through the app proxy, you can actually, and via some connectors, you can actually access applications which are on premises. I was talking also about the Microsoft Entra Private Access, which is our identity-centric zero trust network access. So it's similar to a VPN solution, but much more advanced, and that would give you of course, the possibility to access your own-prem applications from anywhere. However, I think here you have to dig a little bit to understand about the compatibility with your current environment, because it might not work from the beginning. Of course, we did have managed to integrate different protocols. I was speaking about LDAP, NTLM, Kerberos. So rest assured that we have secure hybrid access integrations to support broad range of legacy authentication protocols. However, as I said, I would still invite you to think about the future and to modernize your base, your application, so that we start using these protocols as much as possible. As less as possible. If you think about so moving forward, if you think about application access control, the application access recertification can be done via Entra access reviews, and of course, app access control can be done via Entra entitlement management. If you look at VPN, I just talked about Entra private access. And if you think about server management, think about using Microsoft Entra domain services. Again, all these are some of the patterns that myself and my colleagues have thought about in order to help you understand what's the best path for yourself. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution, and this is why we're saying either migrate or evaluate or think about it, because we also don't know completely your context. Moving forward, so we have other AD-dependent capabilities. As I said in the past, you can replace the legacy VPNs with zero trust network with ZTNA. I think this is a solution which will make your life much easier, just because you will not have to connect to a VPN solution. Everything is going to be done automatically, and it's going to give you plenty of features that you have with your current VPN solution, but much more security and much less friction compared to what you have today. And this was one of the most awaited features and requested features from our customers. So please do consider this solution. When thinking about Microsoft Entra Domain Services, I think the main idea around here is to give you the opportunity to access on-premise applications. So let's talk a little bit about the following scenario. You are in this process of moving to the cloud. You have made good steps. You are actually pretty close to move to the cloud, but you are concerned about the fact that you have some legacy applications, legacy protocols, or some applications that have to be on premises for different reasons. Either you don't have the capacity, or you don't want to make investments to modernize the apps. Either you cannot do it, as I said, because of compliance reasons. For example, banks do get into these challenges about compliance pretty often, or any other reason. So what are your options? I think you have one of the options that we are thinking to bring to you is making those protocols available in the cloud. So for example, having a Kerberos protocol in the cloud, which will allow you to connect the cloud-only user via the Kerberos protocol or Kerberos authentication method to have the user accessing the on-prem application. So that's a path. Another path is actually using Microsoft Entra domain services, because I can understand that not all the applications are using Kerberos, or you might not want to use Kerberos for other reasons. So MEDS is a way through which you can get access to the legacy on-prem applications. But again, at the end of the day, my firm suggestion is actually make a plan and think on how to modernize the app. Sometimes it's about completely rewriting the app. Other times it's about, just modernizing a couple of parts of this app, or maybe adding an extra layer of modernized technology on top of that app, so that it can actually be used or moved to the cloud. I think Ramiro shared with you at the beginning the five steps that we have envisioned for this transformation. You have them here on the screen, and we've spoken about it. Ramiro spoke about it at the beginning of the presentation. So if you move from cloud attached to hybrid, you'll have to think about rolling out conditional access for applications. You will have to think about rolling out identity governance for applications. If you move from hybrid to cloud, you'll have to stop building, of course, AD-dependent apps. You'll have to enable on-prem app remote access without VPN. If you move from cloud first to AD minimized, of course, the on-prem workloads will be replaced with cloud alternatives. And as I said just earlier in the earlier slide, if you still have some AD presence that you need, you can deploy Entra domain services to be able to access those applications from on-prem. I just wanted to give you this a little bit of a deep dive on the on this part of the 5 steps from an application perspective. So I would say that the top 3 go-dos for application pillar, I would say, is that try to integrate modern auth apps to Entra ID. Use the migration wizard for ADFS. Move closer or use more the identity platform. Modernize your applications in such a way that will give you the possibility to leverage our solutions like Entra Application Proxy or Secure Hybrid Access. And lastly, if you cannot do this modernization or if you cannot do these changes, I would say that you should evaluate using the Entra domain services if you need to access the on-prem applications, or think about Kerberos or other authentication protocols that we probably make available in the cloud. I think these were the top 3s that I had in mind, and now I'm gonna gently invite my colleague Justin to take it over and talk to you about the devices part. So Justin, I think I'll hand it over to you.
Well, hello there. My name is Justin Plogert. I'm part of the modern devices team that is focused on device experiences, clients and servers, and how they get identity and how identity is used. Do I need to share my screen here? Okay, hopefully you're able to see that.
All good.
Very good. So I want to cover briefly a couple points. Is what is device trust? Why do we want to do this cloud native thing? What does that migration path look like, and how do we get there? And what are the go-dos? What are the recommendations that we have? And we'll touch on each one of these and briefly and as quickly as we can. Before we go too far, though, I want to start out with the basics, because there's some terminology that people may not be familiar with, and people use a lot of acronyms, and that can be very confusing for some folks. And so please go with me just for a moment here, and I may be restating things that are very clear and you guys might already know, other folks may not. So first type of trust that we talk about, and when I mean trust is meaning that a device can do things like single sign-in, and it has some sort of a means of identifying itself and helping to do things in a secure way. And to establish that trust, that's why we use domain controllers and Entra ID and so forth. We have lots of different mechanisms to do this. To start, we have Active Directory joined. This is what typically people refer to as on-prem, right? We've been talking about this the whole way through. So again, sorry if this is basic, just trying to get everyone centered here. So you might have a lot of different devices that are on-prem, and they're used within that network. They're all, enterprise-owned devices, and they're within the network, right? You can't be connecting to it unless you have like a VPN or some sort to connect into that network perimeter. The next category is what we're talking about, is cloud native. And I sort of put these two together. There are a little bit of differences between them, but roughly speaking, they're very similar. Registered and joined. So previously Azure Active Directory joined and Azure Active Directory registered. Now it's Microsoft Entra registered and joined. The main thing to differentiate these two is from each other within this category is that the registered is usually for bring your own devices or mobile devices, whereas joined is going to be specifically targeted for enterprise-owned devices. And another difference in between them is that in joined, it's the entire device that has trust. So any user that's from that Entra device ID or that Entra ID directory, you're able to log into that device, whereas like within Entra registered, you're within a local profile. And so now we kind of have the opposite side of the spectrums, right? We've been talking about, trying to get to the modern, which is what we just talked about, the registered and joined. And then there's the very, very old, more traditional of Active Directory joined. And of course, we have what's in the middle is Microsoft Entra Hybrid. And the way we describe this is kind of trying to get the best of both worlds. So you're starting from an Active Directory joined state where you're on-prem, but now you want to add some of this new modern goodness. And so people are typically not going to go in the order that I read these. You know, most traditional big enterprises would have started out with Active Directory joined. They're going to add in hybrid so they can start getting to test and validate these flows for cloud native. And then they're going to go Entra join. But if you were to start a new business today and you were trying to figure out what kind of trust that you'd want to start on the left side of this slide with registered and joined. Okay. Next question is why is it important that we're cloud managed and cloud native when we're talking about devices, right? In general, by leveraging cloud managed, we see a reduced support costs of up to 60%, 50% reduction in admin time spent managing updates and so forth, which is a huge boon for your IT admins and so forth. There's a lot of other reasons, such as reducing boot times. Devices run on average 2% faster after modernization. You have less agents running on the machine and so forth. You have less downtime when you're trying to do these updates remotely. And also hopefully reduce call volume for support cases and so forth. Obviously, top of mind is improved security. Everything that we're doing with the more modern desktops is we're building it from ground up with zero trust in mind. Always thinking about how we can have least privilege for the device usage, and having this mentality of assuming breach. You know, always assume that there's people out there trying to break in, and so we need to make sure that we secure these things. And when we're building things up from the foundation in this modern cloud type trust, you know, we have a very different perspective of how things are built. And so we're able to take care of a lot of those considerations as we go. But I think the most important thing is that the way that we have worked has significantly changed over time. We need to manage our users where they are, not where we want them to be. I mean, we want them to be in the securest place and so forth, but we want to make sure that we're making it easy for them to do their job and our IT admins are able to do their job. And right now, there's a lot of hybrid users out there that are going more towards cloud native. And so we can't just ignore that this need exists, right? So going back to the previous you know, slides about this transition and the transformation from going from, you know, cloud attached to hybrid to cloud first to 80 minimized to 100% cloud. These boxes are the ones that kind of are more applicable to the devices. So if you're starting off and you're on-prem, first off, we want you to try to get into hybrid. There's a lot of orgs that are currently in this state. But if you are in hybrid and you want to start getting deeper into the cloud native, there's a lot of different means by which you can start to test the waters. So you can use things like ABD or Windows 365 to be able to get virtualization and be able to have things spun up so that you can connect to those machines that are enabled. You can your non-Windows platforms now support cloud native integration, so we're able to use those. We'll continue to go into more detail, but these are the main idea of the slides of the transition of trying to go from on-prem to cloud. So let's talk about what these recommendations are. Okay. First thing, workstations, probably one of the most important things. Evolving from one type of device trust is not as simple as just flipping a switch. It's going to require consideration for your entire ecosystem, how you provision devices, how you manage those devices, policies, etc. For new workstations, we want you to use Autopilot. A lot of people love Autopilot. It works great. And it honestly works best with Entra join. And it was designed for that. And that doesn't mean that your existing devices at Hyper-V, you know, if you're happy with the the hybrid join, that's not fine and dandy. You should continue on that path that you are on. The main reason that we want you to do this is that it's really expensive to try to re-image all those devices and reset those devices. So if you're in hybrid and it's working for you and you're able to get those workloads, and you're still, you know, about 50-50 trying to be able to get, you know, 50% of the apps that you're trying to access are on-prem and 50% in the cloud, makes perfect sense, right? But the problem is that like there's more than just trying to flip the switch and go all the way to Entra join. You have to worry about policies. There's no group policies currently on Entra. you need to make sure that you've done your due diligence to make sure that you've done all the testing on all the apps to make sure that they're all going to support single sign-in and so forth from a pure Entra ID standpoint if you're going to do registered to joined. It's an entire paradigm shift where you're trying to run your organization. You're not just running it on-prem now, you're running it in the cloud and on-prem. So there's going to be little things that users have to get used to when they're trying to go from a hybrid thing to a native, is that, you know, it's going to seem transparent once they get logged in, but little things like they need to use a different UPN to log in. They can use Windows Hello for Business to log in for more seamlessness. There's just a lot of quality of life things that will improve for the end user, but there's also things that will improve by going to more of a cloud native for the IT admin, and how you manage those devices and how you take care of identifying those devices. So the main recommendation here is if your current fleet is out there, you know, fine, leave it. You know, keep using your hybrid configuration. But as you're going through and you're doing, you know, equipment refresh and so forth, that's where you should be investing in trying to use new workstations. You know, once you've validated that, yes, you can make this work and that all the apps are supported, you know, start putting some of your workloads into the new workstation using cloud native joined. As far as migration, Microsoft does not support the end-to-end conversion and the state that it leaves the device in. So the official Microsoft recommendation for converting is to just reset the machines and reprovision. And doing that actively as a course of, you know, purposefulness as a IT effort. Some orgs have done it and they've been successful, but it's a very high touch type of thing. And so our recommendation is that you age out the hybrid devices as you're replacing them with your equipment refresh. Other workstations, right? This is a big one. Is if you have Windows 7 or 8 in your environment, you need to get those out of there as quickly as possible. They're out of support. They're not getting security patches. It's just a huge liability for your org. You should consider upgrading to Windows 10, preferably Windows 11. Windows 10 is going to be going out of life in the next year. But you need to remember that you're also going to get a lot of benefits by going, besides the security benefits, you're going to get MDM management to put more modern security agents on it. You can do all the stuff that you would expect from cloud native. We do see users that are out there that are, you know, using Windows Server as their primary workstation. I wouldn't say that that's a common recommendation. We understand that some users need to do that for their development and so forth, but I guess our recommendation is that, you know, those are meant for server workloads, and if developers need to do that, their day-to-day stuff should really be done on a regular workstation and not a server workstation. While there's a lot of similarities between workstation and client, there's some things that aren't quite the same, and they're not really managed the same. And so in general, you should keep those workloads separated and try not to use, you know, server SKUs for workstation purposes. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's about it for this topic. So next, talking about virtualization, VDI, and so forth. In considering not taking on the cloud native journey, it's important to realize that you may have nuanced, like, line of business apps that may not be able to be simply rewritten. You would need to redeploy and have someone, you know, go and touch the bits to make everything work. Just because your devices can't be Entra joined doesn't mean that you can't get the benefits of cloud native. You can use something like VDI to be able to deploy either way, right? So if you're really early in your journey, you can start deploying VDI that is cloud native to start to get some runtime on it. On the other side, once you've kind of flipped and you've sort of have more workload on the cloud native side, you can, you know, put those apps that are going to be bound to the on-prem into some sort of VDI behind the network perimeter, and then you'd be able to still have users that would be able to connect to those remote instances to be able to do whatever line of business app that's required. So it's really about finding the right tool in the toolbox, because there's a lot of different ways that you could solve these problems, but using these tool sets will help you, right? They help you be able to make this transition. And so the biggest guidance we'd give is use them, right? Leverage these as a tool. Another thing that we recommend doing is a privileged admin workstation. This has been a guidance for quite a long time for on-prem and Active Directory Cloud, cloud native endpoints, etc. But it was really hard to deploy in on-prem environments because you're bound to that specific thing. But we have a lot of native technologies for strongly authenticating these users. But now that we have cloud native things that you can use Hello for Business, YubiKeys, Smart Keys, you can use conditional access policies to limit the authenticated global administrators from authenticating on any device except for this privileged access. It really helps a lot by having additional controls for different people based upon their access profiles. And so pause stations are the way to go for any of those super users that have it. And especially if it's just a just-in-time type of thing, that they can access that only when needed and not use it on a day-to-day basis. Okay, lapse. We can modernize the approach of protecting our administrator accounts by making sure that they're only, and I just had a PowerPoint crash. Doesn't that always happen? Let me relaunch it here, or if someone has it up that they could display. Ramiro, do you have the presentation that you could show, or
I can. So what slide were we in?
We were just talking about lapse, I think.
Okay, so slide 67. Okay, coming right up. 1 second. We got
Thank you. I'm not sure why that happened.
No worries. 1 moment. 1 moment.
Ooh, I think I got it back.
You got it?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yay, computers.
Okay, I put it up while you figured that out.
Okay, there we go. We're back on. Sorry, folks. Okay, so we're talking about lapse. Previously, we had, a way to do the, like when customers would do this previously, they would basically have, IT desk that would have these, passwords on-prem, and then they would call the IT org, and then the org would go through and then help them, escalate them to be able to get that access, right? But we now have cloud native capabilities where we can instead store the local admin passwords and get to those and be able to access them much easier. So because Entra ID is a modern platform, you can do things like wrapping conditional access policies around their access to the Entra portal and require phish-resistant creds before they can go retrieve one of these. And so it's more of like a self-service type of a thing in the modern, where you are also able to add additional layers of security before they can get to that. So it's kind of best of both worlds, that you're not having to incur the overhead of having to have your help desk get engaged with every single time that a user wants to do this. And you're able to ensure that you have security around that not anyone is just going and accessing it from, their brother, sister's, computer that's sitting on the floor. They're going to have to use it on a secure place and access it from there. Let's see. Okay. So non-Windows desktops. This is one of the ones that I'm very passionate about, is because we want to try to create as much parity in experience and security as we can between, all the platforms. Obviously, Windows is one of the heaviest workloads that we have if you look at it, but Mac OS is quickly coming up to be one of the higher ones. Customers have a couple hundred Macs compared to thousands and thousands of Windows devices, but the Mac users tend to be executives, business decision makers, developers, significant numbers of power users that within the business. And so we really need to make sure that those users are secure, because they may have very sensitive things on their machines as well. So at a bare minimum, we need to make sure that we're getting the Macs and Linux machines under MDM enrollment. Most things that Mac OS supports from a security perspective requires MDM. And so it's really table stakes to be able to have Mac OS be able to support MDM and be able to make them integrated and as secure as possible. Recently, we just are working on a new feature that's been in private preview or public preview since I think April or May this year, where we're introducing Platform SSO, which is going to be a much bigger benefit. It's kind of like Windows Hello for Business in that you're having a hardware bound key when you're logging into the machine, and so it's a much more secure way of managing that desktop and having that experience run. On Linux, we're also doing things where we're trying to make it more parity with both Mac and Windows, but we're a little bit farther back. And we're finding that the main scenario for Linux that we're focused on is going to be desktop developers that are using Linux desktop. We're continuing to evolve and build more and more scenarios. But again, it's more of trying to understand our user scenarios of where they need to be and how can we make sure that they're most important. Right now, from an SFI standpoint, Secure Future Initiative, we're very laser focused on trying to make sure that everyone's using phish resistant. And so that's where a lot of our investment is going, is to make sure that on Mac and Linux and also all mobile platforms, that all of those 100% we have phish resistant credentials that are fully supported. And so that's a theme that you're going to be seeing in the next year, is that we're going to see more reinforcement in this area, right? Yeah, I think that's about it on that one. And so this kind of pull things together and kind of close things out here. This is a good summary slide of all the things that we just kind of talked about, and the things that we need to consider. The recap that I'll give you right here real quick is if you're not using Windows 10 or 11 and it's a Windows SKU, get off of it. If it's for desktop users, you should be using, Windows 8 and so forth should be deprecated and moved to Windows 11. Servers shouldn't be used for workstations. You should be using privileged admin workstations to be able to make sure that the splash zone of people trying to break into things, you're having a very controlled environment for those admin users to be able to use. Using laps is all kinds of great goodness. Start trying it and using the other non-Windows platforms for Mac OS and Linux, using MDM and the company portal to be able to manage those devices and look forward to where we're going to be having phish resistant creds on Linux. Try out Platform SSO and so forth. As we said earlier, there's no single bullet. It's not a quick thing. It's a change of mindset. It's a change of how you see and how you manage everything within your network. And so from a device standpoint, you need to look at the big picture and make incremental steps. And so that roadmap that we showed a couple slides earlier, those are all things that will help you get on that path. I think that's about all I have.